So, Mr. Camgoespony, tell me what's on your mind.
Something that I've been seeing a lot in the analysis community lately is people using the phrase out of character whenever a character does something a bit unexpected or strange, and that's something that's often bugged me, mainly because I just don't think it's really possible.
Would you happen to have any examples others have brought up with you?
Well, one of the most common examples would be in the fairly recent episode, Some Pony to Watch Over Me. In that story, Applejack takes on an overprotective big sister sort of role with Applebloom. I remember a lot of people complained about this being out of character for Applejack. And something else that I just don't understand is why a fairly small change in someone's behavior like that is considered out of character, while I haven't seen anyone say anything about the infamous complete 180 that Pinkie Pie pulled in Party of One.
Well, I can think of two reasons why that may be. First off, a lot of people who relate to Pinkie Pie, both in her moments of joy and her moments of despair, wouldn't be so quick to think that she had been out of character in that episode despite never seeing her like that before. Whereas with Applejack, I can imagine that a lot of people who relate to her more down-to-earth behavior were a bit put off by her being overly protective to such a high extent, because perhaps they don't relate quite so well to her actions there. Secondly, I believe that many people who were surprised by Pinkie's behavior in Party of One were willing to let it slide because it was rather entertaining. Whereas I've heard many people say that Applejack's behavior in Some Pony to Watch Over Me turned out to be rather irritating. Whether it is either or both of these reasons, I'm not really sure. What do you think, Cam?
Well, I think that both of these reasons are a part of the problem. I think too many people say out of character, which implies some fault on the writer's part, in the sense that it implies that they wrote the character incorrectly, when these people really mean to say something like, I didn't like the way this character acted, or I didn't find this funny and or relatable.
Well, I suppose there are some people who seem to think that the phrase out of character would fit far better than anything else they could say. And I might have actually done that a couple of times myself a long ways back. I have been teaching myself to better explain my feelings on why certain elements work and others don't, but I must admit it takes practice and research to analyze stories and characters in a way that most people will enjoy hearing about. Not everyone has put in that much practice. But at the same time, do we really need to be offended when someone says the term out of character?
I can definitely understand people having difficulty articulating their thoughts. It's still something that I have difficulty with, after all. And I definitely wouldn't say that I'm offended by people using the term. It's just that I fear it's becoming another buzzword that people use without really understanding what it means. Because, at least with what I think it means, it's that it's technically impossible for it to happen in the show.
Well, how can we change that? How do we help others be honest about the show while also putting aside these buzzwords?
I think it would help to explain more clearly what some of these terms mean, and of course the definition of these terms are somewhat subject to opinion, but I don't think it would hurt to at least share my opinions on what these terms mean and when they should or shouldn't be used.
Perhaps not, but I for one am still interested in hearing someone's feelings even when they start saying terms like out of character. And more often than not, I can understand why they believe ponies like Applejack and Pinkie Pie seem a little less believable or relatable in certain episodes, especially in cases where they look up to them throughout the majority of the show and want to learn from their examples. And then suddenly they are confronted by moments where such characters aren't quite as likable or inspiring. It's very much like having a mentor in your life who has taught you so much and been someone you look up to, and then having that moment where you realize they can falter too. It can be hard to accept that at times. I don't know if everyone who uses the term out of character is doing so for these reasons, but it wouldn't surprise me if many of them felt that way about it. What do you think, Cam?
I agree. I think those are perfectly valid reasons for not liking something that a character says or does. But I just feel like calling those moments out of character implies that the writers have done something incorrectly, which I think blames the writers for an issue that is really no one's fault at all. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that if I hear someone use that phrase, then I immediately discredit them and everything they say. I still hear them out, and they may have completely valid reasons behind not liking something, such as the reasons you gave. But the term out of character tends to cover up those reasons and replace them with something that just doesn't work as well.
Well, I still want to see a lot more of MLP for years to come, and the majority of the fandom seems to agree. However, if many people don't seem to think that the writers are making the characters believable, likable, inspiring, and/or relatable, then yeah, the show is going to suffer. It won't really matter if the writers have very good reasons for making the characters act in certain ways. In the end, if there aren't enough people to latch on to what the MLP staff are creating, then inevitably we're going to lose out on a long-lasting show that entertains so many of us to begin with. I, for one, am going to keep finding all the great elements that this show has to offer, while also carefully pointing out its flaws. And I hope that, at least in my own small way, I can help others to enjoy the show even more, which in turn will help the fandom to grow, and My Little Pony become even greater because of it.
I completely agree with everything you just said there. I think it's important that the writers make characters believable, likable, inspiring, and relatable. And I would never say that someone is wrong for complaining if a character isn't any of those, but the phrase out of character is not a phrase that means unbelievable, unlikable, uninspiring, or unrelatable. What it means is incorrect, which means that the character has acted in some way that is not in line with their personality. And this is where I think the impossibility part comes in.
Perhaps, but then that begs the question. The MLP staff are not all the same people who started working on the show at the beginning. The torch has passed to many new writers, animators, editors, and so forth. And I'm sure the staff will continue to change in the years to come. Who determines what is correct then? You talk about how we shouldn't use terms that mean incorrect. What if someone who uses the phrase out of character right now one day becomes part of the show and starts writing that character how they think he or she should be written? What then?
I think that no matter who is writing the character, whatever they make them say or do would be correct. The personality of a character is defined by the things they say or do, and when those actions are the very definition of their personality, I think it's impossible for any one of those actions to be incorrect. It just changes the definition, regardless of who wrote those actions.
Well, I suppose that discussion will have to wait for another day. Shall we continue on this next week?
I don't think another appointment would be necessary. I've gone over most of what I wanted to talk about, and just as I wanted to encourage people to more closely examine the reasoning behind what they say, you have made me look more closely into my own reasoning. Perhaps my definition of out of character was more subject to my personal opinion than I thought, and the people who say it have a better idea of what they're talking about than I initially gave them credit for. Either way, good discussion, and I'm sure many more people will have their own 2 cents to add. See you later, Doctor.
Take care, Cam. It's good to be helping.